Want to thank Mark Goins for joining us. Obviously, this has been an unprecedented election, just from sheer numbers and sheer numbers of different kinds of votes. Can you kind of tell the reader a little bit about the obviously there's the votes that people did during early voting on the machine and at their specific precincts on the machine. Can you kind of go through that process for those votes as far as from local to state and then on to federal, how those get processed?
Yeah, and first I want to thank the Marion County News for allowing me to be here today to explain the system. But it has been a very difficult election year, unique year, obviously with the pandemic, trying to conduct an election during these times, and kudos to the election officials all across the state who developed, with us a plan back in March and April, and then executed the plan in August and November. It was a pretty comprehensive plan, 80-page plan, and that helped. And getting to that, that's what we see as far as the different types of categories of votes and where we are today in Tennessee. Actually, this was an election where we actually set numerous records. We have more registered voters than we've ever had in the state of Tennessee at 4.4 million. We had more people vote during early voting than ever voted before. We ended up almost at 2.3 million, which is a tremendous record. We had more people vote total, and that was at 3 million. We had more people vote by mail than we've ever had. So basically, every category that you can look at in Tennessee, we were able to break all kinds of records. On election night, even though we had more by mail ballots and all the early voting activity that we took place, and obviously looking at the pandemic and social distancing and all those things, and trying to get the reports back to not only the local level but also to the state. I'm happy to report that 93 out of 95 counties by midnight on election night had reported the absentee by mail ballots as well as election day ballots. We ended up having the final county, and that was Williamson County. They came in around 4 a.m. So they continued to count, and then shortly after 4 a.m. they had all of the election results in. That includes anything that was cast on the machine. So if you went during early voting, or if you went on election day and you voted on the machine, it counted. Those ballots were counted. If you sent in your ballot by mail, those would have been counted as well as any military ballot we would receive. Any ballot that had not been counted, there is a provision in state law that if someone shows up and they don't have a photo ID, in Tennessee, as you know, Tennessee requires a photo ID. It has to be government issued, either state issued or federally issued ID. If someone shows up, they don't have one, they have until 2 business days after the election to bring that in. So that's made to say if you show up on election day, you have your ID, but you've forgotten it, or if you lost it, but you are an eligible voter in Tennessee, you're still going to have 2 days to bring that in. And so that individual casts a provisional ballot. That provisional ballot will only count if they bring in the required ID. And like I say, they have to do that to the Election Commission office within 2 business days after the election. So that's some ballots that obviously we couldn't count on election day. And so that's one set of provisional ballots. There's another set of provisional ballots that we could have, and we typically don't have an election, but we saw them this year. People who request a by-mail ballot, and if there's a provision in the law that says essentially you request a by-mail ballot, but there may be some kind of issue with you receiving that ballot or delivering that ballot back to the Election Commission through the mail, then there's a safe harbor provision, which essentially means we're going to take care of that voter. If there's something that normally is out of their control, we're going to allow that individual to vote a provisional ballot. And on election night, we're going to check and make sure that your ballot was not sent back in. Because if it's sent back in, that's the ballot we're going to count, and you're not eligible to vote twice. But this year, what we saw was some folks that were concerned or just changed their mind. And that's typically not how you vote a provisional, just by changing your mind. Because once you request a by mail ballot, that's how you're supposed to vote. That's how you
Right.
signed the form saying that's how you want to vote and that's how you're going to vote. But we saw some people change their mind this time. And so in those instances, if someone changed their mind or, like I say, had an issue with delivery of the ballot back and they showed up on election day or during early voting, we would inform that individual, we're showing that you've already requested by mail ballot. Essentially, you've already voted, because we don't know if that ballot's coming back. And so we made those individuals vote a provisional ballot. I say made, I'll use that loosely because actually state law says that's what you do. State
Right.
law says you cast that provisional ballot. Obviously on election night, the way that's working with the thousands of ballots that's coming in, it depends on what county you're in, but Davidson County had over 30,000 by mail ballots. So on election night, it's very difficult to ascertain whether someone has cast a by mail ballot. And so that typically is not done on election night either. Those ballots are counted after election day because we want to make sure that no one gets more than one vote. We
Sure.
count every legal vote, and we want to make sure we don't count it twice.
Yeah.
So that's the second set of provisional. So you got the first provisional, that's photo ID. You've got the second set that is if someone requested by mail ballot and then they show up on election day or during early voting to actually vote in person. And then the third type of provisional ballot, which is typically what we see more in Tennessee. And like I say, this was kind of unique with the by mail scenario where folks were showing up, because it's not something we normally see, but we certainly saw a lot of that this year. But the third set of provisional ballots, and it's more the traditional ballot, provisional ballot. In 1990s, the federal government passed some may recall it as the Motor Voter Act, but essentially what it says is there's certain agencies out there, and primarily the agency you're going to be aware of is where you get your driver's license, but there's other agencies as well. And essentially the federal government mandated that these agencies that aren't election officials and typically don't do voter registration, well, didn't do voter registration, but they mandated that they also would all offer voter registration services. Well, because that's not their primary role, during the 90s, you could see that there were some instances where someone would go and they would attempt to register at one of these agencies, but it wasn't getting to the election commission office. So later, in a few years, the federal government said, what we're going to do is we're going to pass a law, and the states followed. But essentially, they said for federal elections, if someone shows up and they're not on the voter rolls, then you're going to vote them a provisional ballot. And then if it's a federal election, we are going to require you to check with the different agencies. And we're going to require the different agencies to keep a record of everyone who attempted to register there. So fast forward, that's the typical provisionals we have. So now if someone shows up to vote and they're not on the voter rolls, we're not going to let them vote on the machine, because once they vote on the machine, we can't take that vote back. At the same time, if someone did truly attempt to register to vote, we need to count that vote. So those
Absolutely.
provisionals are a little different in that it takes time to research these provisionals. So someone votes those during early voting on election day. What will happen? The counties will submit them to the state, and we work with the different agencies. So we have a way where each agency will look at that specific voter, and they will let us know if that person attempted to register to vote there, if they completed a voter registration form. If they did, there's a bipartisan board that will meet after the election, and that board will come together and decide based on the evidence that this person either did or they didn't attempt to register to vote, and make sure that they completed the paperwork on election day or during early voting when they voted provisional. If all those things are adequate, the paperwork is consistent with the name, the address, everything that we have as far as matching up, then that vote will count. So those provisionals take a little longer. 2016, I think November, I think we had about 11,000 statewide. In many instances, those ballots will not count because we can't find a record of these folks.
Right.
They may have, some states have same day registration or something like that, and they may have moved here from a state that has same day registration where you literally can register the same day as election day or something
Right.
along those lines. And so sometimes voters will get confused and think Tennessee law is the same as other states. Interesting enough, the Tennessee Constitution prohibits same day registration in Tennessee. So it's not something that we could do in Tennessee because the Constitution prohibits it. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's the three different types of provisionals. Those provisionals are counted after election day. Rarely do we see a situation where they make a difference in an election, but sometimes you'll have a very close election decided by a few votes, and they can make a, if they're legally. But the thing is, there's a lot of research that goes into into the back end, making sure that all legal votes count and any non-legal vote doesn't count. So there's a lot of
Right.
work that goes into it to make sure it's accurate and that we have fair, sensible, and safe elections in Tennessee.
And to that end, do I understand correctly that the state has actually issued a extension on checking those provisional ballots to make sure that they check each one of those to make sure if it's a legal vote, to make sure that it gets counted?
Yeah, that happens typically after every presidential election because of the volume. That's something that hasn't changed. It's not unique to this election. Uh, it's something we did in 16, something we did in 12, and a lot of times it's more about the larger counties than it is
Right.
some of the smaller mid-sized counties because they just have so many more. But the folks at the different agencies, they'll work extra hours to check these ballots. But yeah, on the local level, we want to make sure that, so there's two different types of verification. If I show up and I say I believe I registered to vote, on the local level, they're going to make sure they're going to go through their voter registration records just to make sure that there's not a form there that they've not missed. Because you got to understand, there's thousands upon thousands of documents that during an election setting going back and forth. And then the second component of that, we've got to be meticulous about this. So you're doing that on the local level, and then on the state level, or working with the various different agencies. And so, yes, we did grant an extension on counting the provisional ballots, but that's something that we do after every presidential just because of the volume of them. When you're dealing with, 11,000 ballots in the scheme of things, when you're dealing with 3 million ballots that's already been cast and counted, that's not a lot of ballots statewide. But
Right.
the difference is these ballots are, I don't want to call them problem ballots, but these, by their very nature, that's what they are. I mean, it means that when these individuals showed up, we were not allowed to vote them conventionally, which is
Traditional.
on the machine, because there's some type of issue. And so it takes a while to work through these issues. And the most important thing is we want to make sure that we get it right. Now, this is a little distinction from what some of the other states, if you see continuous counting in some of these other states that's going on, they're still counting their by-mail ballots. I want to make sure that everyone understands Tennessee is not in that same situation. We were able to count our by-mail ballots, like I say, 93 out of 95 counties before midnight to after midnight, but they got it done, that morning. So we're through counting military ballots, we're through counting by-mail ballots, we're through counting election day and early voting ballots. We're literally down to the provisional ballots, and the photo ID, if you either brought it back within 2 days or you didn't bring it back within 2
Right.
days. The absentee by mail ballots, you either mailed your ballot back or you didn't mail your ballot back.
Gotcha.
Really, the thing that's time consuming now is just going through the different agencies to search records to find out if we do have a voter registration form on file for that individual that for whatever reason didn't make it to the election commission office. And like I
Gotcha.
say, where sometimes the breakdown is, if you go to a driver's license agency, their
Right.
primary function is to not register individuals to vote. Their primary function is to give someone their driver's license, or renew their driver's license, do things like that. So we want to make sure that these folks that, are able to get the forms to us. I will say throughout the years, the process is, certainly even just the 12 years I've been here as coordinator of elections, the process has gotten so much better. And
Right.
normally when someone votes a provisional ballot, we're not going to find where they've attempted to register to vote, because the agencies have gotten so much better in transferring that information over to us. Early 2000, based on when the federal law passed, my understanding wasn't so great, but it's certainly gotten a lot better
I
throughout
see.
the years.
I see. And just to clarify, the mail-in ballots that you refer to, is that just military and absentee, or is there any additional form of the mail-in?
No, that's the only millions that you'd have
Okay.
is folks that would vote by mail. or if you are voting military, and that's also by mail, or overseas. We have some overseas citizens as well. They're classified under the same law as those who are in the military. So they're
Gotcha.
eligible to vote by mail.
Okay. All right. And then overall, now you mentioned the 11,000 provisional votes statewide. How does that compare with past presidential elections? Is that on par, or was that another big jump in numbers?
Well, that was 2016 numbers. I've
Oh,
got some preliminary numbers for this for the state for this election, and actually, I don't have some of the larger counties. We're
oh,
missing in the numbers that's been submitted to us from counties. We're up to 8,000, but that's missing Davidson County and about 4 other larger counties that we have out there. That's kind of on par. It looks like we're going to be, on par where we were in 2016. Probably some a little. We will have some more, but I think the reason we're going to have more provisionals this year in some of the larger counties, like I say, is because the folks that had requested by mail ballot, and then they changed. They
showed
decided
up.
that's not how they wanted to vote, and they showed up during either early voting or election day. But 11,000, like I say, was 2016. We're going to be. I wish I could give you a hard number, but we're still waiting on
Oh,
some numbers from some of those larger counties.
yeah. Well,
That
I know.
8,000 does include Shelby. Shelby County has included their number, and I think they
Okay.
had, well, actually, I don't want to say. I
Okay.
don't have
Yeah.
the number in front of me, but
it's
I think
it's
they
a
had 1,000, but I may be off on that.
it's a year where every syllable matters.
Well, it's 95 counties, and I just don't want to be wrong.
Sure. Sure.
But
I
I did
tot-
I did review when we did the survey last week. I did review it pretty strong.
I got you. And just for clarification, what is the deadline for the state to certify their election and send it to the federal?
So November the 23rd so the counties certify on the local level and they send it to us. So November the 23rd is when all the counties will be completed. November the 24th, there's some documents that we will send to the U.S. Congress and U.S. Senate. They have to be signed by the governor, secretary of state, and some others. Then December the 14th is when the electoral college will meet. So December the 14th is essentially when the presidential election, if you will, everyone will come together and do the electoral college there. But it's all based off of, it all feeds up from the county certification. And like I say, that county certification is November the 23rd. And then shortly thereafter, we'll have the electoral college, and that'll be here in Nashville. And then from there, the legislature will come back in January, and if there's any challenges to legislative races, they'll hear them at that point.
I see. I see. Well, State Administrator of Elections, I know you've had some long days here, and we appreciate you talking with us, bringing us up to speed, and hopefully everything will go smooth for you through the rest of the process. And we wish you well.
Hey, well, thank you, and thank you to the voters for setting the records that we set this year, and thanks to the election officials across this state for conducting a smooth election in November and August.
All right. Well, thank you again.
All right, thank you.